Overheard my wife's late-night call with her ex-boss. He still believes that promotion was merit-based. I just had to wear that red dress and let him think he was special. My reaction? I resigned, burned every bridge she built with my name, and moved to a town with no cell signal. A decade later, I'm back as the CEO of the rival company that just bought her former employer. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't trying to catch her doing anything wrong. It was late, probably close to 2 a.m. I had gotten up to grab a glass of water and noticed she wasn't in bed. The light from her phone cast a faint glow across the patio. I figured she was having trouble sleeping and stepped into the kitchen to check on her. But the moment I heard her voice, I stopped. There was a tone I hadn't heard from her in years. Flirty, smug, almost giddy. At first, I thought she was just venting about work, maybe talking to a friend. But then she said his name, her old boss, the one who had promoted her a couple of years back. The promotion that changed everything for her. More money, more status, a bigger office, and a reputation that seemed to sparkle. It wasn't the words that broke me. It was how easily she said them. No guilt, no hesitation. Just a cold, calculated recollection of how she manipulated someone into believing she earned something she didn't. What made it worse? I had been a part of that moment in her career. I had helped her prep for the interview, pulled data from my own work to support her proposal, even rewrote the technical section of her pitch deck. She had called me her secret weapon. I'd smiled like a fool, proud to be the guy behind the scenes. She told him it was all her, that he was smart for recognizing her brilliance. She wore the red dress, played coy, let him think she might be interested, without ever having to say anything. She said all of this to someone on the phone like it was just funny office gossip. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I didn't confront her. I didn't make a scene. That's not who I am. I just watched her come back inside, kiss me lightly on the cheek, and curl into bed like she hadn't just casually disrespected the core of our marriage. The next morning, I left for work like everything was fine. But I wasn't going to live like a placeholder anymore. I was 37, no kids, 10 years into a marriage that suddenly felt like a transaction I didn't realize I'd agreed to. I worked as a senior architect at a mid-sized tech firm, respected, stable, with a clear path upward. But it hit me then. I had been standing still while she'd used our relationship as a springboard. Clarice was the type of woman who could command a room. She knew how to read people, how to smile just enough, how to sound assertive without seeming aggressive. That talent got her far. And she was smart, don't get me wrong. But she also knew how to leverage everything, including me. I spent that week pretending everything was okay. At home, I was affectionate, calm. At work, I wrapped up loose ends. I gave no notice, just left a resignation letter on my desk and walked out. I started with nothing but the savings in our joint account, half of which I moved without her noticing, because I handled our finances and she never really paid attention to the details. She'd never asked to manage the money, just liked to see it grow. That worked in my favor. I drove north, first to Duluth, then past the Twin Ports, then further, until I found a tiny rental cabin in Ely, Minnesota, surrounded by forests, no cell signal, spotty internet, an air that actually smelled like pine instead of exhaust. I didn't tell her where I went. I didn't answer her calls. She sent emails, at first worried, then confused, then angry. But I never replied. I didn't even tell my family. I stayed in that cabin for nearly 2 years. I lived small, chopped wood, built things with my hands, grew a beard so thick I barely recognized myself in the mirror. But I found peace. And eventually, I found clarity. I began freelancing again, quietly, anonymously, under a different name. I had experience, and companies needed results more than they needed credentials. I started picking up niche software projects, then contracts, then teams. Over the next few years, I built something. Small at first, then bigger. A tech development firm focused on back-end infrastructure solutions for logistics companies. Not flashy, but essential. We were fast, efficient, private. When the firm began gaining traction, I brought in partners, people I met online or through mutual contacts. Each had a reason for staying off the grid. Each had been burned by the system in one way or another. And together, we built a company that didn't play the usual game. 10 years later, our valuation exceeded $400 million. And that's when opportunity knocked. Her company, the one where she'd risen quickly, then plateaued, was struggling. Overextended, under-innovated, and too proud to notice they were bleeding talent to smaller, more agile competitors like us. After that day in the hallway, I didn't hear from Clarice for a while. Weeks passed, then a couple of months. During that time, I stayed focused on the integration of the companies. We had teams to consolidate, redundant software to phase out, and a mountain of internal politics to clean up. Her name came up now and then, mostly in archived email chains or buried in project logs. I let her fade into the past like smoke. Privately, I wondered if she had figured it out. Not just that I'd orchestrated the end of her career at that firm, but how far back it really went. How my disappearing act wasn't a breakdown, but a rebuild. Some nights, though, When I was alone in my condo with nothing but the city lights flickering against the windows, I would catch myself thinking about that night on the patio. That red dress. That laugh. The way she had said it like it was just some inside joke. I had thought I was the lucky one, being married to someone so dynamic. But now, with 10 years of hindsight, I realized how much of myself I had buried trying to keep up with her version of ambition. Then one day, I got an email. It was from a personal address I didn't recognize, but her name was at the bottom. It was short. No apology. No big emotional plea. Just, I saw the papers. You really did it. If you ever want to talk, I still have your parents' number. I'll respect your silence either way. Clarice, I didn't reply. Not because I wanted to punish her. I think I just didn't have anything left to say. It felt like trying to explain a storm to someone who'd only ever seen puddles. She would never understand the magnitude of what she'd done to me, or what I had to become to get out of it. I did call my parents, though. That was a hard conversation. I hadn't spoken to them since the week I vanished. I'd left a letter in my father's garage, taped to the workbench, explaining that I was okay, but needed time, space, a clean slate. They had honored that, even though it hurt them. I'll always be grateful for it. My dad answered on the third ring. There was silence for a moment. Then he said, "Took you long enough. We talked for hours. I promised I'd visit." And I did. Flew back to Indy, rented a car, and drove out to the old neighborhood. The streets hadn't changed much. The neighbors were older, quieter. The lawns weren't as green. Seeing my parents again was emotional, but grounding. They didn't ask for details. Just hugged me, sat me down, and fed me lasagna like I'd just come home from war. Maybe, in a way, I had. A few months later, I was invited to speak at a conference in San Francisco. Normally, I avoided public appearances, but this one was too aligned with our goals to ignore. I flew out, gave a talk on innovation ethics in mid-sized tech firms, and afterwards, stuck around for the networking dinner. That's when I ran into Micah, one of Clarice's old colleagues. He didn't recognize me at first, but after a moment, his face changed. "Is it really you? God, I thought you dropped off the planet." He was polite, but clearly curious. We talked for a while. I let him talk more than I spoke. He mentioned that Clarice had tried starting a consulting firm after being let go. "Didn't really take off," he said. "She's working freelance now. Kinda quiet. People moved on." I nodded. There wasn't much more to say. Micah added, "She still talks about you sometimes. Says you were the smartest guy she ever knew. Never really got over how you left." I didn't comment. What was there to say? She had made her choices. I had made mine. In the years that followed, I learned to live a little differently. I dated here and there, but nothing serious. I was honest with women from the beginning, that I wasn't looking for someone to complete me, just someone who wouldn't compete with me. Someone real. And that's harder to find than it sounds. Eventually, I met Sarah. She wasn't in tech. She was a teacher, smart, kind, and grounded. The kind of woman who asked about your day and really listened. Who didn't need to win a room to feel valuable. We met at a bookstore, of all places. She was looking for a historical fiction novel I had just finished, and we started talking. Our first date was coffee. Our second was a long walk by the lake. No pressure, no showboating. Just conversations that felt like actual connection. I told her my story eventually. Not all at once, but enough. She didn't flinch. Just looked at me and said, "Sounds like you've lived a few lives already." With Sarah, I started to feel something I hadn't in years. Safe. Not comfortable. Not complacent. Safe. And yet, there was one thing that still gnawed at me. It wasn't bitterness. Not revenge. Not even sadness. It was curiosity. Because I had seen Clarice as the architect of my downfall. But had I ever asked what had made her that way? What pushed her to play the game the way she did? Was she always like that? Or had the industry twisted her slowly, like it tried to do to all of us? There was still a conversation left unfinished. But not because I needed closure. I think I just wanted to know if she ever looked back. Not with regret, but with understanding. If she ever wondered what could have happened if she had just told the truth. Not to her boss. Not to her company. A few weeks after running into Micah at that conference in San Francisco, I found myself in Chicago on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Sarah was out with her sister, and I had the apartment to myself. I made a cup of coffee and sat on the balcony overlooking the river, watching the boats drift by, their wakes folding gently into the shoreline. The city had changed in subtle ways. New buildings, old signs replaced. But in some ways, everything felt the same. And maybe that's what triggered the thought. What if I reached out? Not because I wanted to rekindle anything. Not because I missed her. But because something in me was still holding onto that night. The night I heard her say those words with a laugh, as if they didn't matter. I stared at the message Clarice had sent months ago. I had archived it back then, unsure why I hadn't just deleted it. Maybe part of me expected her to follow up, push harder. But she hadn't. True to her word, she'd stayed silent. And that's what made me respond. All I wrote was, "I remember everything. I hope you do too." I didn't expect a reply, but one came, almost instantly. "I do. And I'm sorry. For all of it. I don't expect anything from you. But thank you for saying something." That was it. No drama. No invitation to meet. Just those few lines. And strangely, it left me feeling lighter, like I had been holding my breath for years and could finally let it out. A couple of days later, I ran into a former coworker from my old life, the firm I had quit 10 years ago when I first left everything behind. His name was Ray, a senior engineer when I was still there, and now apparently a VP. We bumped into each other at a mutual friend's wedding outside Milwaukee. He was shocked to see me. Man, when you disappeared, nobody knew what the hell happened. There were rumors you'd moved to Europe or joined some tech cult in the mountains. I laughed. Close enough. I went dark for a while. He nodded slowly. I don't blame you. Things went sideways after you left. That company, it never felt the same. We talked for a while, mostly about old coworkers, where people had ended up. It felt surreal, hearing about people I used to see every day now scattered across states and industries. Ray filled in some gaps, including a few things about Clarice that I hadn't known. Apparently, after I vanished, she had tried to spin the story, said I'd been depressed, burned out, and needed time to find myself. That narrative got her some sympathy at work, but not enough to keep her rising. Without me smoothing things behind the scenes, her charm wore thin. Her pitches got sloppier. Her team performance declined. People stopped covering for her. She never really recovered professionally, Ray said, not unkindly. Still smart, but her edges showed. That struck me, because I knew those edges. I had seen them up close for a decade. I had smoothed over them, justified them, excused them as stress or pressure or just how the world worked. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe the world doesn't have to work like that. Maybe some people choose to play it that way because they don't know how to do it differently. That week, I found myself going through an old hard drive I hadn't touched in years. It was filled with files from our shared life, joint projects, spreadsheets, even dinner recipes saved under ridiculous names. And buried deep in a folder labeled Q3 Drafts was something I had forgotten about, a video. It was a recording of us rehearsing her big pitch the night before her promotion. She had begged me to record it so she could watch her posture and delivery. I pressed play. The video started with her standing in front of our living room TV, her laptop propped up on a stack of cookbooks, blazer crisp, hair pinned. I was sitting on the couch, watching, and then something unexpected happened. Before she launched into the pitch, she looked at the camera and said, "This is only going to work because of you. You know that, right? I'm not even nervous because I've got your brain behind it." She smiled, genuine, grateful. Then the recording cut to her stumbling over her second slide, cursing under her breath and laughing. I had forgotten how light we could be before everything twisted. I watched it 3 times, not because I missed her, but because it reminded me that not every moment had been a lie. People can change, for better or worse. And maybe that's what had happened to both of us. At one point, about 6 months later, I saw her again. By complete accident. I was grabbing a coffee at a small shop on the north side. I heard someone say my name behind me. My full name, not the one most people in Chicago used. I turned, and there she was. Clarice. She looked older, but still sharp. Same confident posture. But there was a softness around her eyes that hadn't been there before. She was holding a book, not a laptop, which somehow surprised me. "Didn't think I'd ever run into you in the wild," she said. I smiled slightly. "Life's funny." We stood in silence for a moment. She asked, "Can I sit?" I nodded, and we took a small table near the window. No big drama. No raised voices. Just 2 people who had once shared everything and now shared only history. She told me about her consulting work, how hard it was to rebuild a reputation in a field where charm wore off fast and results mattered more. She admitted, for the first time, that she'd leaned too hard on influence and not enough on substance. "I wasn't evil," she said. "Just selfish. And stupid." I didn't disagree. She asked about my life. I told her about the company. About Sarah. About the daughter I was helping raise. Not biologically mine, but mine all the same. She smiled at that. A genuine one. "I always thought you'd be a good dad." Something in me winced at that. Not because it hurt, but because it almost didn't. She finished her coffee, stood up, and said, "Thanks for letting me sit. That's more than I deserved." And then she walked out the door. I watched her go. No part of me wanted to follow. Not anymore. There was no great vindication. No movie ending. No poetic justice. Just 2 people who had built something messy and let it fall apart. But now, 10 years later, I had something I never thought I'd find again, stillness. And that, I realized, was the real revenge. Not against her, but against the life I had once let myself be trapped in. The days following that unexpected coffee shop encounter were strangely quiet, not in the literal sense, but internally. My mind wasn't racing the way it used to, not cluttered with rehearsed comebacks or what-if scenarios. For the first time in a long time, it felt like I had finally emptied the last suitcase of emotional baggage I'd been carrying around since the day I walked out of my old life. Sarah noticed the change before I did. "You've been quieter lately," she said one evening as we cleaned up the kitchen. Not in a bad way. Just different. I smiled, dried my hands on a towel. "I think I finally closed a door I left open too long." She nodded, not asking which door. She didn't need to. She'd seen the pieces of the story over time. I hadn't dumped it all on her like some confessional. Just bits and pieces, filtered through late-night conversations, quiet moments, or when old memories bubbled to the surface. Sarah wasn't one to pry. She just listened and remembered, which made her rare. It was one of the reasons I'd slowly let her into the rooms I kept locked. Somewhere around this time, an old coworker from the tech startup world reached out. Melissa, sharp, direct, and unapologetically honest, ran a podcast about the long game stories in entrepreneurship. Not just the billion-dollar IPOs, but the personal stuff, the people behind the logos. She invited me on. I want to talk about what it's like to rebuild after a personal implosion, she said over Zoom. You're one of the few who's been to hell and back, but never tried to sell it as a self-help book. I hesitated. I didn't need publicity, but there was something appealing about telling the story in my own words, on my terms, not the polished version companies like to hear, but the ugly, honest one. The one with heartbreak, mistakes, and getting lost in the woods both metaphorically and literally. I agreed. We recorded the episode over 2 sessions. Melissa didn't interrupt or overdirect. She just let me speak. I told her about burning out, about walking away, about the years I spent in Ely figuring out who I was when nobody was watching. I skipped names, kept it respectful, but didn't sugarcoat anything. The episode blew up. I didn't expect that. Apparently, people were starving for stories that weren't about winning, but surviving. I got emails from strangers, men mostly, who said they'd lived parts of my life. Some had lost everything. Some were still in marriages where they felt invisible. Others just wanted to say, thanks for not pretending it was easy. One message stood out. It was from a guy named Eric, mid-50s, married 30 years. He wrote, your story made me realize I've been building someone else's dreams for half my life. I thought that was love. Now I'm not sure. That hit hard. Because that had been me. I had convinced myself that love was sacrifice, even if it meant disappearing bit by bit. That being the supportive husband meant muting my own ambitions for the sake of hers. But love built on erasure isn't love. It's just endurance. About 2 months after the podcast aired, I got a call from someone I hadn't heard from in over a decade, Clarice's younger brother, Jonas. Back in the day, we were close. We used to grab beers on Fridays, talk about music, trade awful fantasy football advice. He was the only person from her family who didn't treat me like a temporary accessory. His voice hadn't changed, but it carried something new. Wait, maybe. Years. Hey, I know this is out of the blue, he said, but I just wanted to say I heard your interview. And I didn't know how bad it got for you. I always figured things went sour, but she never really talked about it. I appreciated the call more than I expected. We ended up chatting for over an hour. He filled me in on their side of the story, the awkward holidays after I disappeared, the half-truths Clarice told their parents, how they slowly realized I wasn't the villain in the narrative she'd painted. She's different now, he said. Not better or worse. Just quieter. That didn't surprise me. He mentioned she was dating again. Nothing serious, but stable. He said she'd been doing volunteer work with an organization that helped young women navigate male-dominated industries. That seems ironic, I said, before I could catch myself. He chuckled. Yeah, or maybe it's her way of making peace. I didn't comment further. Some doors, even when closed, still echo. It wasn't long after that when I was invited to speak at a university event in Bloomington. I almost declined. It was a long drive, and I didn't love being on stages, but Sarah encouraged me. Maybe it's good, she said, brushing my shoulder. You've come full circle. The event was hosted by IU's Kelley School of Business. I was scheduled to speak on ethical decision-making in tech and entrepreneurship. It was a decent crowd, students, faculty, a few local professionals. I kept it straightforward. Talked about the difference between doing good work and being good in your work. About how tech, like relationships, is just a series of compounding trust decisions. And how betrayal doesn't start with something huge. It starts with the small things, the ones you justify at the time. Afterward, a student approached me. She was maybe 22, dressed like she hadn't slept in 2 days, eyes bright, with that specific brand of desperation that only finals week can create. Can I ask you something personal? She said. How do you know when someone really values you, and not just what you can do for them? That question sat with me. I looked at her and said, when you stop producing for them, do they stay? She blinked. What if you don't know? Then stop. Pause the giving. See what happens. She nodded slowly, and I hoped it landed. Because I wished someone had told me that at her age. I left Bloomington just before sunset. The air was warm for early spring. I rolled down the windows and let the wind fill the car. Somewhere along the drive back to Chicago, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. There was gray in my beard now, lines around my eyes. And for the first time, I didn't mind. I looked like someone who had lived. It was 6 months after the university event that the opportunity for true closure, and what some might call revenge, fell into my lap. We had been preparing to launch a new division at the company, something big. Not just a product or a service, but an initiative that would redefine how our industry viewed intellectual property, project attribution, and internal recognition. Basically, we were creating an internal ledger that would track every contribution to a project across departments, teams, and individuals in full transparency. It would eliminate the possibility of someone claiming credit for work they didn't do. The system couldn't be gamed. Not by managers, not by senior executives, not by those who had charisma but no substance. If you didn't touch the work, your name didn't show up on the roll. We called it Root, a nod to transparency, traceability, and the roots of every idea being visible. Our early internal tests blew expectations out of the water. Employees who'd been quiet workhorses for years suddenly found their efforts recognized at scale. Bonuses went to the right people. Promotions started making sense. Morale went up, and the story caught attention. Tech blogs picked it up, then podcasts, then legacy media. A revolution in workplace recognition, they called it. Naturally, I was asked to speak at a summit in Washington, D.C., a national HR and innovation forum, as a keynote presenter. I brought Sarah and my daughter along for the trip. We made it into a long weekend, explored museums, had ice cream by the Lincoln Memorial, and tried to explain to a 6-year-old why the Smithsonian doesn't allow climbing on the moon rocks. The day of the summit arrived, and it was packed. Hundreds of execs, founders, HR specialists from Fortune 500s, educators, and policy folks. I was the final speaker, the closer, which was always a little surreal, considering I used to be the guy behind the slides, not in front of the mic. I stood on that stage, lights bright, Sarah in the crowd, and I told them my story. Not by name, not with a tabloid flair, but with truth. I told them about a man who had built a life in the shadows of someone else's ambition, who had watched his work become someone else's ladder, who had sacrificed credit, voice, and vision, all in the name of love, or what he thought was love. And how one night, he heard the truth, and it broke him. I told them about starting over, about disappearing, about coming back stronger, not with vengeance in his heart, but clarity in his mind, about building a company that valued honesty more than charisma, effort more than image. I introduced Root. The demo got a standing ovation, but the real moment of vindication, that came the next day. I was walking through the hotel lobby, coffee in hand, badge still swinging from my neck, when I saw her. Clarice. She looked the same, yet not. A little older, a little slower in her step, dressed impeccably, of course, still graceful, still poised. Our eyes met, and for the second time in as many years, fate had brought us face to face. She walked toward me. This time, no hesitation. I saw your talk, she said. I nodded. Didn't expect you here. She shrugged. A client invited me. I almost didn't come. A beat passed. That system, she said, Root, it would have made a big difference at my old company. I sipped my coffee. That was the point. She looked down, then up again. You always were better at the real work. I just knew how to sell it. You sold it well, I replied. Too well sometimes. She smiled, but it wasn't smug. It was tired. I used to think winning meant being seen. Now I think it just means being able to sleep at night. I didn't say anything. She reached into her purse, pulled out a business card, and handed it to me. Consulting. Small firm. Independent. If you ever want help scaling that system, she said, I'd work for you. I mean that. I looked at the card, then at her. I appreciate that, I said. But we've got a good team. Her face didn't fall. She just nodded. I figured. But I had to ask. She stood there for another moment, like she wanted to say more, then tucked her hands into her coat pockets and gave me a small smile. You're not the same man I married, she said. No, I said. I'm the man who finally stopped giving away his name. She walked away. And that was it. No fireworks. No yelling. No dramatic courtroom speeches or revenge plotted from the shadows. Just a woman who once tried to climb over me, realizing that the man she dismissed had become someone impossible to ignore. I didn't need to destroy her. I simply outgrew her. And I did it on my own terms. Back in Chicago, I sat on the balcony with Sarah that night, sipping wine while our daughter slept inside. The sky was clear, city lights shimmering across the lake. You okay? She asked. Better than okay, I said. She leaned her head on my shoulder. And for the first time, I wasn't thinking about the past. I was finally, completely free.